Hello, my name is Grayson Caldwell, and today I will be diving into intrusion detection systems, or IDSs, and honeypots. Our topics of discussion today are, of course, intrusion detection systems and honeypots. But when we look at intrusion detection systems, I'm going to be looking at specifically network and host differences between the two types. Following that, of course, is going to be honeypots. And then afterwards, I'm going to be diving into use cases of both systems, and I'll also be going through examples of utilizing both systems and a research paper which looks to combine both of these devices to prevent denial of service attacks on a server. So let's dive in. What is an intrusion detection system, or IDS? An intrusion detected system is a device or software which monitors a system or the network for bad actors and policy violations. Depending on this scope, it can either monitor a single machine or used at an enterprise level. The two main types of IDSs, which I'll be diving into after this, are host-based and network-based. And I mean, you can kind of get a gist on a host-based will primarily look to prevent, say, like file changes, versus the network is looking more at attacks from an external source to the system trying to make a connection. So let's dive into network intrusion detective system and IDS. And like a fallacy in network intrusion detection systems is that they prevent intrusions from happening. They do not necessarily. While network intrusion detection systems can have the capability for preventing, they are mainly a monitoring tool, which monitors network traffic and sees what the difference between a typical request and an attack request is. So like an NIDS will monitor the network, and of course when an intrusion occurs, there's going to be an alert. And this alert will tell the higher authorities that there's an intrusion attempt or just suspicious activity happening and that it needs to be further investigated. And so this might get you thinking here, but wait, isn't this kind of what a firewall is supposed to do? No. So like an NIDS does not prevent intrusions, whereas a firewall has a set list of rules, unless it's a newer firewall, which is beyond the scope of discussion, which I'm not really going to talk about that. So an NIDS can signal attacks from outside the host, whereas a firewall has a set of rules which determines all the allowed connections. So like say you have a known user that wants to make a remote desktop connection. You don't just allow remote desktop connection. You allow a specific subset and a request on a specific port, etc., to make the connection. And so where in the network should a network intrusion detection system be implemented? And so in a perfect world, the NIDS should be configured on the subnet with the firewall, so you have both of these tools. Firewall to explicitly state, okay, these are what we want for inbound and outbound traffic, and then an NIDS as well to monitor all of this inbound and outbound network for, say, your computer has a virus and is trying to transmit this virus. An NIDS can actually monitor this outbound request, and it will be able to notify a higher authority that, hey, the system that is inbound might be infected and it has suspicious behavior. And while this sounds amazing and great, this can create a bottleneck on a network. At an enterprise level, you have tens of thousands and at times even millions of users using a system at the same time. If an NIDS is analyzing every single packet that is being sent out and transmitted inbound, outbound of this system, nothing is ever going to work and the system is going to get bogged down very quickly. So let's dive into some network intrusion detection system examples. And we're going to dive into this as both from a free and open source software perspective and a commercial off-the-shelf software. And so for those that aren't aware, free and open source code is completely, well, not necessarily completely available to the public, but it is available and has the GNU license as an example, where you have the ability to just take the software, and as long as its purposes are for, say, research purposes, for individual purposes, not necessarily an enterprise level solution, they can use the software. Commercial off the shelf is more products that you typically buy and are using and can be used at enterprise level. These products a lot of the time offer enterprise level support and also a much more robust platform. And so FOSS examples of some network intrusion detection systems are Snort, which uses signature-based detection and protocol analysis. Another example is Suricata. This is a competitor of Snort, but has a lot of more modern features like multi-threaded capability, GPU acceleration, and also multimodal statistic anomaly detection, which is basically just a big word for saying, wait, that's not intended behavior, based on a lot of models. And then for our commercial off-the-shelf example, we have Cisco IDS, which I'm sure almost everyone has heard of Cisco before. And this is an enterprise level intrusion detection system or intrusion prevention system with fully comprehensive threat detection suite. So let's look at now some host intrusion detection systems, or HIDS. HIDS is software that on a system which has the ability to monitor key system files and ensure they are not tampered with. So say you have some root files, like in System 32. You really do not want anyone touching these files. And a lot of the times in an enterprise situation, these files are protected and access and privileges to modify and change these files is not allowed. And so if there's an HIDS on a system and these files are tampered with, an HIDS can provide rapid response and alerts the end user. An HIDS can also change these things, change back and roll back these changes. So say like a key registry value is changed, and the registry has a very powerful tool in Windows which can both allow way more access than is needed to a system or prevent it as well. You change a registry value, you can very easily block USB devices from attaching. You change the value even just by 1 bit, you then allow all USB mass storage devices to connect to a system. And so at an enterprise level with very valuable information that you do not want that information to get leaked, and you don't want a USB device, say a thumb drive, to be attached. And so, yeah, HIDSs are also very important for mission critical devices where downtime is not feasible. So you want to find and quarantine the viruses as quickly as possible. So how would an HIDS detect threats? There are 6 basic detection methods right here that I have in front of you that HIDSs use to detect threats. The first one that we're going to go for is signature-based. Signature-based matches a known threat from an authority, similarly to how an antivirus will import an antivirus definition and admit it to its antivirus software. Next up, we have behavioral anomaly. A behavioral anomaly is say there's a user that never changes in the file and never goes into a certain area of a system. If they then all of a sudden are going into system32 and changing your application host config file to create an FTP site, that's an anomaly and that's not intended behavior, so it's most likely a bad actor. And then the HIDS will then prevent the user from performing this action. Next up, we have heuristic analysis. Heuristic analysis identifies known techniques used by bad agents. So say, like in our labs that we perform in this class, buffer overflows. HIDS has this information, understands what a buffer overflow attack is, and it can identify when it's happening and prevent this from happening. Next up, we have also file integrity monitoring, which kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, where there's those critical files that you really do not want the permissions changed to modify and or remove these files. And last but not least here, we have log analysis. And like log analysis, in the case of this, is essentially Event Viewer in Windows has the ability to monitor all actions that a user does on a computer. If you use these logs, you can tell when an attack is coming, and the HIDS can realize when an attack is happening and prevent it from that. So here are just a few examples of some FOSS and COS examples of HIDS. And so for FOSS examples, we have OSSEC, which can perform log analysis, registry monitoring, and also rootkit detection. Next up, we have Samhain, which provides rootkit detection as well, and also the ability to monitor multiple OSs. So if you're running a bunch of virtual machines, you can, or a honeypot even, you can have Samhain be monitoring all these systems at once for any changes in the system. Some COTS examples, we have Manage Engine, Event Log Analyzer, which combines kind of both HIDS and NIDS capabilities into an enterprise level solution. And last up, we have Paper Trail, which at a basic level is free. However, there are many more robust security options that can be paid for. And also another benefit is that it can be hosted on the cloud. So switching up from this, let's dive into what is a honeypot. And so a honeypot is essentially just a computer system designed to lure cyber threats away from a system. And so a physical example just of like in real life is, say you have a lockbox with nothing in it but a bunch of rocks that you say valuable on the side of it. And you have a real safe which has nothing on it. You're using that safe which has valuable with nothing in it to kind of lure a bad actor from taking that instead of the safe that has all your money in it. And it's just like a real world example, and honeypots kind of act similarly at a cyber level. So let's look at the benefits of a honeypot. With so many devices connected to the web, honeypots can be necessary to protect and monitor your devices. And like printers, for example, they're a device on a network that companies really do not secure as much as they should be and kind of leave it up to the enterprise to protect these. And so if you have a honeypot printer to like avoid some bad actor from connecting to a printer and then gaining access to your network, this is kind of where a honeypot would benefit that system. Then also, IoT devices are insanely widespread. IoT devices are everywhere. You can use a honeypot to mimic some of these IoT systems to lure the attackers. They then would connect to this honeypot, and instead of like gaining access to your fridge and then through a vulnerability in a specific fridge model gain access to your network, they instead are trapped in the honeypot. So let's look at the purpose of honeypots. We have 1, detect attacks, 2 redirect attacks. There's 3 collecting information, also 4 improve security. So one, when we look at detecting attacks, we talk about a trigger or a ping will go to the security authority to tell them that there's an attack happening and that someone has entered this honeypot that might be a malicious actor. So number 2, we talk about redirecting attackers. There's no such thing as perfect security, and given enough time, any hacker could basically get into almost any system. But the time is the important resource here. We want to distract attackers away from this crucial system to make the time that they would need to spend to gain access to a system outweighs the benefit from them getting into the system. And so when we look at collecting information, a honeypot logs all the interactions on that honeypot system from the hacker and exports it to the security authority. And of course, it's improving security here by adding that additional layer of defense for production systems. And later, we can even see how if you use an intrusion detection system, you can redirect those intrusions away from your devices towards a honeypot to gain more information about these attacks and what their end outcome is. And so just some examples of honeypots that are out there. We have database, spider, email, and malware. A decoy database honeypot kind of monitors attacks on databases. Databases contain insane amounts of information, and if a bad actor can get a hold and modify a database, this can drastically affect the integrity of the results and the purpose of the database. So setting up a honeypot database can help prevent and just add an extra layer of defense from people trying to maliciously enter a database. Next up we have spider. And so spider ones are basically web scrapers, just preventing web scrapers. And like web crawling bots like Google uses this specifically to scrape the web to try and create a concise index of everything. Look at ChatGPT as well. ChatGPT basically scrapes the internet to try and answer its input. And so a honeypot can be used to kind of trap these scrapers in a system to prevent it from accessing the data that you want. Email ones are kind of used to study and trap spam and phishing emails and learn more about them. No one wants to be at the end of a phishing attack. Almost everyone is guilty of being attacked by a phishing email. But a honeypot email can utilize the information on these phishing attacks to both get the information on how they're performing these phishing attacks and just gain more information. And so last but not least, we have the malware honeypot, which is really just Trojan horse. You see the Trojan horse is entering your system. You have a honeypot, which will essentially allow this Trojan horse to become fully enacted and cause havoc on the honeypot rather than your system. Next back, we have some drawbacks of honeypots. And so depending on the number of honeypots running, like especially in an IoT system, if you're trying to mimic a honeypot of every single device, this number adds up very quickly and can drain system resources. It also kind of, when you're adding a honeypot, you are essentially opening up your system. You want attackers to go into the honeypot. But say you have smart hackers that no one is the smartest person. There's always someone out there trying and willing to break your stuff, given enough motivation to try and do that. You have a honeypot, you are then opening up what might be a closed system to these kinds of attacks. And then the other hard part is kind of creating a nice middle ground on honeypots that are not too noticeable, which who cares if it's too easy, it's an obvious honeypot, and then also honeypots that are too difficult to access, which means it's just that the time for hackers is not worth getting trapped in the honeypot to expose their attack methods. And so I went through a research paper here now that combines both a intrusion detection system and a honeypot to prevent denial of service attacks. Motivation for this is that a denial of service, well, let's just first start off with denial of service attacks. Denial of service attacks are attacks which target to shut down a system by flooding it with bogus requests. And so IoT has also risen drastically over the years, where there's billions of devices out there attached to all the networks, which creates a lot of unsecure systems for bad actors to try and dive into. And also, IoT devices don't necessarily have robust security measures to prevent attacks, more specifically denial of service. So why not introduce an intrusion detection system in a honeypot on the network to direct the traffic of a denial of service attack away from your server to a honeypot to gain information on these DOS attacks that are coming and better prevent them from affecting you. And so the proposed architecture from this paper is you have an IDS. The IDS will take in client data, and based on whether the IDS determines this is good data or DOS attack, it will send good data to the server and the DOS attacks to the honeypot. The honeypot will then log the information of the DOS attacks on the attackers and provide that log information to the main server. So when this was simulated, these people who wrote the article used a variable number of bots, and they also are monitoring the server efficiency. The server efficiency is the ratio of the data transmitted from the client to the data received by the server. So basically just, is the data, all the data that you are sending to the server being received by the server? And so after conducting their simulation, as you can see in the table, with the increasing number of bots, you definitely have a decrease efficiency, of course, because there's more traffic on the network. But with a honeypot, the efficiency just is much higher comparatively as the number of bots increase. And so like we see this and it's kind of like, oh, well, this is kind of like layman's terms. What is this experiment missing? This is simple. If an attacker is using 100 bots, there's no way that this is really getting any effect that they really want to get. Really, tens of millions of devices really need bots, I guess in this case, need to be used in order to gain leverage on a modern day system. It's not to say that DOS attacks can't be done with a low number of bots, it's just the scale on which this experiment was performed is not necessarily accurate towards what an actual DOS attempt could look like. And also, what the article doesn't really talk about is what's the determining factor for a good transmission to the server? How does the IDS know what is a good request and what is a bad request? Are they using specific firewall rules? Are they using specific like external IPs? Are they using different ports that they're looking for? The article really does not expound upon how the IDS determines an attack from a good request. Also, it really doesn't define how it determines a DOS attack. DOS attacks can take many different forms, whether it be a TCP attack with a sign flood, HTTP flood for like more web-based DOS attacks, and also when we're looking at UDP attacks, how is it looking at UDP requests? And then also, what happens if multiple requests are coming at the same time when it's distributed with a DDoS attack? These are just kind of some of the shortfallings that came in this article, but the article provides a good basis on deterring these attacks. And then in conclusion, we have Really, IDS and honeypots are both very effective cybersecurity tools which can curb cyber attacks. The IDS monitors attacks at both the network and host level, and honeypots mimic key systems in an enterprise to lure attackers away from key infrastructure. And then combining these two devices, when at very basic levels, can help prevent servers from being overwhelmed by DOS attacks. Thank you all for listening to my presentation on intrusion detection systems and honeypots. Listed for you is the references, and thank you very much.